Hello again, and welcome to my channel, IELTS with Ralph. Hope you're fine. Today, I'm going to teach you another lesson about academic writing task 1. And as you remember in our previous part, we worked on prepositions, and you saw that writing correct prepositions in your report can improve your band score. And today, we're going to talk about numbers. So you might think to yourself that, well, writing numbers is not that much really difficult, but I do not mean by writing number, for example, 20 or 2000. Sometimes in the graph or chart, the number is not, let's say, an exact number. It is not 20. It's just below or above 20. So in this case, if you write exact number, you will lose mark. So when the data is not 20, it's around 20. So you should write some, let's say, words that tell the examiner that this is not the exact number. All right. So you have to write the exact number if you are pretty sure that data given to you is the exact number. If it's exactly in 20, you can write 20. But if you're not sure, and you can see that it is around 20 or maybe 21 or 19, so you should be very careful with writing exact numbers. Now, sometimes the number is above or below, right? So in this case, you can write 4 adverbs like approximately. When it's 19, right? So you can write approximately 20. Or around 20. It means 21 or maybe 19 or maybe 18, right? More or less, and roughly. So these 4 adverbs are used when you want to talk about numbers above or below the exact number. If you want to talk about less than, for example, the data shows that it's, for example, 29, right? So it's less than 30, less than the exact number. You can use these adverbs. Nearly, just under, slightly below, for example, slightly below 40, a little under, or a little less than. So these 5 adverbs are used when you want to talk about less than an exact number. Now, if you want to talk about more than, for example, it's 21 or 22, and you want to say more than 20, you can use 4 other adverbs like slightly over 20, or just over 20, or a little above, or a little more than. These are 4 adverbs. Now let's work on some examples. For example, 52 persons, right? 52 persons. You can simply write 52 persons, but you can change it to say slightly over 50 persons. So it sounds much better, right? Slightly over 50 persons. Or 48 persons. You can write a little under 50 persons. Okay. Or now, we're going to use some fractions here. For instead of 20 persons, it's better to write 1/5 or a fifth, right? So instead of 20 persons. Instead of 18 persons, so we worked on 1/5, all right? Then when it's 18%, it's less than 1/5. So you can write slightly less than 1/5. So you see how interesting the numbers are here. So you don't simply write 18%, or you write slightly less than 1/5. For example, slightly less than 1/5 of the people living in Los Angeles are actors, slightly less than 1/5. Instead of 25%, you can write a quarter. And 28% is just over a quarter. For example, just over a quarter of the population lives in the capital city. Now, 33%. Well, it's a third or 1/3, 33%. And 66% is 2/3. All right. So instead of 66%, you can write 2/3. For example, a third of the employees work remotely, whereas 2/3 come to the office every day. 75%, it's 3/4, right? It's exactly 3/4, right? And 71% is nearly 3/4, right? 71%. For example, exactly 3/4 of the respondents said they would prefer to receive $10 now to $20 tomorrow. All right. Instead of 80%, you can write 4/5. 4/5, right? And 78% is a little under 4/5. So you can see how interesting writing numbers is. A little under 4/5. Now, an example. A little under 4/5 of the grassland was developed for housing between 1900 and 1950. All right, we can use other ways to talk about percentage. For example, if something is under 50%, we can write a minority of. A minority of. If it's under 25%, you can write a small minority of. A small minority of. If it's over 50%, you can write a majority of. And if it's over 75%, you can write a large majority of. For example, a large majority of the companies paid less than 10% tax on their income. Now let's work on other numbers. Now, if it's 5%, so we can write instead of 5%, we can write a tiny proportion. A tiny proportion. If it's 20%, so I told you to write 1/5, all right? So if there are two 20% in the graph and you want to mention all of them, for one of them you can write 1/5. For another one, you can write a small proportion. For 65%, you can write a large proportion, and for 85%, you can write a huge proportion. Now, an example. A tiny proportion of the population have a huge proportion of the country's wealth. All right. Now, let's work on increase and decrease, which is double or triple or things like this. All right. When there is an increase from 100 to 200, so it's double. The verb is to double. When there is an increase from 100 to 300, so the verb is to triple, all right? To triple. If it's there is an increase from 100 to 400, then the verb is to quadruple, all right? And if there is a decrease from 200 to 100, then it's to halve, all right? If the decrease is from 100 to 75, then but we can say to shrink by a quarter. To shrink, fall, by a quarter. If the decrease is from 100 to 25, then we can say to reduce, for example, in size by 3/4, right? Now let's work on two examples. The price of rice doubled from $0.60 to $1.20. So doubled from. The number of people living in apartments quadrupled between 1950 and 1990. So it means that, for example, it was 100 in 1950 and it increased to, let's say, 400. So quadrupled. Now, I'm going to ask you 4 questions and I'm going to answer the questions. But first, you will, let's say, make sentence in your mind, right? And then we'll work on it. For example, the first question. Imagine that the price of oil in 1950 was $10 a barrel. And in 1990, it was $20 a barrel. So how can you make a sentence out of this data we have? Of course, the price doubled, right? So we can make a sentence like this. The price of a barrel of oil doubled from $10 to $20 between 1950 and 1990. All right, this is our first question and actually an answer. Now, let's work on second question. We're going to talk about Stockholm residents. 62% of the residents own Volvos. So how can we say this? So instead of 62%, you know that 66% was 2/3. So 62% is a little under 2/3, right? So we can say like this. A little under 2/3 of the residents of Stockholm own a Volvo. Very easy. Now, our third question, we're going to talk about motorbike owners with facial hair. That was 82%. So 82%, as you remember, we said that, for example, for 80, more than 80, we can say a large proportion, right? So our sentence will be something like this. A large proportion of motorbike owners have facial hair. And our last question. MySpace active daily users in 2005 was 200 million, and in 2010 was 50 million. So there was a decrease in the number of users from, let's say, 200 million to 50 million people. So we can say that it shrank by 3/4, right? Shrank by 3/4. Now, our sentence will be like this. The number of MySpace daily active users shrank by 3/4 between 2005 and 2010. That's all. So now you can see that writing numbers is very, very important. And since in analyzing data on graphs, we deal with so many numbers, so it's very useful for you to have variety in your writing. So don't just write the percentage of something, for example, 50% or 60%. You can change the numbers, then your writing will sound more natural. All right, that's all for today's lesson. I hope you've enjoyed this part. Our next part will be about comparisons, and we'll talk about this part more in detail. Until next time, stay tuned and enjoy your time, and goodbye.